So today we're going to talk about module number 5, called the language of energy, one of the 9 principles of cellular transformation, which Jennifer covers in her book. And that's what she's here for today, to tell us more about it in her words. So you want to get us started? Language of energy, big subject.
Yes, huge subject, and one of my favorite, actually. The language of energy, we will be exploring what is it exactly. And basically the language of energy is God's language, is kind of how I like to summarize it, or the language of the universe and how it communicates to and through us. You could explain it as, or how I often describe it, is that there are 2 different levels of communication happening often at one time. One is where we operate and express with our 5 senses, our mind, our intellect, the stories we tell, the words we use, the actions we take. In a sense, they're coming through what you could say the filter of the mind. And there's the deeper level of communication that's taking place underneath or behind the words we use and the actions that we're taking. And this is the energy impact, the energy that's coming behind everything that we say and do. And that energy is only ever doing one of 2 things, and that's expanding or contracting. And we want to learn how to read that language of energy, to understand what it's saying at any given moment. Is the energy expanding right now, or is it contracting? Because what I've come to learn in my journey is that when we are living in alignment with the universal law, let's say, of expansion, then we're on track with our self and our purpose. When we're off track, we're often operating from or in a place of contraction. And it's not always so easy to decipher expansion and contraction, because we have a lot of different programs operating and levels of conditioning that can delude or convince us that we are expanding when maybe we're not, or vice versa. So it's about deepening into the intricacies of understanding.
Right. And may I, sorry, I thought that was a full stop. May I add that we might not know in the moment, because generally speaking, it becomes very obvious if we are aligned with an expanding reality and backing up the energy or not. That will show up in exhaustion, in depressions, in contraction, literally in the body being contracted, and so on and so forth. But just to make that differentiation clear, that it's in the moment, sometimes it does get hard, and that is one of the things we'll be learning and practicing. So,
yep, very good. And I think the most important part of learning the language of energy is being able to hear the universe guiding you. It's directly connected to our intuition. So our ability to feel is how we interpret the language of energy. So if we're really disconnected from feeling, we're going to have a more difficult time reading the energy. And those of us who are really good at feeling and trusting our intuition and connecting with or reading the energy, it's said that we have a good, strong connection to the feminine principle of creation, or what we also might call the divine feminine. And our job is to act on that, to trust what we're feeling, trust the intuitive guidance system, and then learn to act on it, which is where the male or masculine principle of creation comes in, both of which have almost nothing to do with gender, very much more about principles of creative expression. The feminine principle being the God force, or the language of energy, and the masculine being the expression of it, and where we put it into form, and where we back it up and trust it and act on it. Most of us are a bit off in some degree in one of those camps. Either we're not able to hear it very well, we think we're hearing it, but maybe we're off, or we are very intuitive and perceptive and tuned in, but we're terrified to trust ourselves, or we don't act on it. And a fundamental part of the CT healing process is, as you very well know now, Kanika, is about learning that language of energy and learning to back it up and act on it and speak its truth and take action when it's moving through us in the direction of expansion, because that's where love comes from. That's ultimately what, in my experience, generates love from the inside, is when we act on the wisdom and guidance coming from our insides, from our hara, from our intuition, from our heart. And when we act on that, energy frees up, something happens, and there's an expansion that takes place. And that's where healing, or like a fountain of healing, can be generated.
And also, the more we learn to listen, to trust, and to back it up, the more we get to hear and listen and back it up. So it actually becomes louder as we start to trust it coming through us.
100%. Another very important point is that energy is power, and the whole journey of waking up, the whole journey of healing and transforming our trauma and our pain and our history, in my personal experience, is about getting our power back and learning how to live in a balance of power. So often power can be a dirty word for people, and it's really down to interpretation or definition. My definition of power is that there's either clean or authentic power, or there's toxic or unclean power. And the toxic power steals from others. And authentic power is one that's based very much on our vulnerability and taking responsibility for our deepest, truest feelings, our deepest intuitive knowingness, acting on those. It's based on compassion, on the positive qualities. And if in our past, where this is true for all of us, I'd say, every single one of us, we've had our power taken away unconsciously by unconscious belief systems and individuals and systems, that's where we suffer. It's when that power imbalance has taken place. The journey of healing is, how do we get our power back from all those places where we gave it away or it was taken away? And learning the language of energy is a combination of healing the history of where our power was taken away, learning about power as energy and suppressed power as pain, and learning to take that energy back. How do we do that? That's the cellular transformation process. That's the transformational prayer that we discussed in our previous principle of going through that journey with divine guidance to uncover all those places where we gave our power away, so that we can get it back and we can rewrite that story from one of empowerment. But it's not only healing the history, it's learning, it's kind of catching up with yourself so that you can be in the moment. And then how do I stay in my power? How do I stay in my authenticity and my vulnerability and my connection now? And that there's a whole set of tools and practices and ways of living the lifestyle of CT in a way that keep you connected, and ultimately to what? Your dantians, right? Which the lower dantian, the middle dantian, and the upper dantian in Taoist philosophy, and also what we call the hara, which is Japanese for belly, which is referring to the lower dantian, the power center in the body. We will be focusing a lot on the dantians, specifically the lower or dantian or the hara, because this is where God's brain, the hub of the universe's greater mind, lives inside our physical body. So the language of energy, we learn to read it as energy is either expanding or contracting, but the brain that processes that information is in the hara. It's greater mind versus lesser mind, which is the name we use for our intellect, but it's learning how to connect to and listen to and express from greater mind in our lower belly.
Right. And in that way, really the body becomes the instrument through which we tune in and hear the language of energy. I think that's just important to say, because often as we speak about energy, it sounds kind of like something up there and airy-fairy, and that it's actually a very, very embodied experience, and that we also have to move through the layers of where we cannot connect to our body as that instrument, or what gets in the way of reading the language of energy, because we have disconnected, numbed out, distracted, so on and so forth, found ways to not be able to be in the body or feel the body and the feelings present. Do you want to say something about the difference between intuition and programming on that note?
That's just what I was going to say next. Yes, we learn to really trust our intuition in CT. And I think that's ultimately, if I could summarize what saved my life, it would be learning to trust my intuition is why I'm here. And back it up. And where we run into the wonderful challenges around that is, but how do I know if what I'm trusting is my intuition? And what potentially could I be trusting that's not my intuition? And that's what we call programs or programming. So we will be exploring in this module, what is intuition exactly? And oftentimes I hear people say, oh, my intuition was wrong, or I had an intuition about something, but it was off. My use of the word intuition within CT context is always right, because the way I understand and use the word intuition is that it's only ever referring to the highest, most expanded place of intelligence that we can have access to. So when I use the word intuition, I'm always only and forever referring to that highest place. So in other words, you can't have any wrong intuitions about anything. If we think we're having some kind of intuitive hit, but it turns out that it's mirrored in our Sankhya, our externals, that it's not coming from the highest place, then it's coming from something else. And that something else is our conditioning or our programming. And we have many different programs, archetypal programs. There's ancient programs. There's programs we developed since we were infants, probably picked up last week. There's many different layers of programming. Programming is basically the false self. Just to summarize very quickly, there's those elements that the way we're programmed to behave, that are rooted in and built on top of some sort of trauma that caused us to split away from our authentic self and perform life. So we all have them. We're all operating from those places. And by learning the language of energy and playing it out with one another in the context of community, in the context of workshops, making this learning of this language conscious, then we can figure out, is this my intuition that I'm trusting right now? And when I speak this out loud, when I take this action, is it creating expansion for everybody? Is it bringing love into the space? Is it healing me and others? Chances are, if it's a yes, then that's your intuition. That's the divine feminine moving through you that you're acting on, that you're getting out of the way of, and magic happens in that place. And then we can learn equally as much when I act on my programming or my conditioning or my trauma, my unconscious nature. What happens? Like, what's mirrored back to me? Non-judgmentally, we want to play it out. We want to get the wisdom from it. It's not that there's any judgment in this place. We all make mistakes. That's how we learn. So we're using one another as mirrors and reflections of being able to decipher and discern what is my intuition and what are my programs. And to me, that is so valuable to know the difference. Otherwise, we're like at the mercy of our programming, or we're operating in the dark in a sense. So that to me is, almost by definition, waking up. I'm waking up to my true nature and seeing the vital importance of the role that our intuition plays in our own healing journey and our own awakening journey. I don't think we have any idea how important intuition is to our own healing path. So that's what we're going to really dive into.
Yeah. I mean, in my experience, it's directly connected to aliveness, directly, like immediate connection to. And I want to also say that it sounds like scary. It is scary for many people when we start practicing this, potentially getting it wrong. So what we often do is we don't trust ourselves. We don't back ourselves up in that place because we're afraid to get it wrong and to really have the permission to fuck up, let's say, and that we start small. That's where we can, incrementally practice. It can be with little things. Do I want to eat this? Do I want to eat that? What is that it doesn't become this big, life-changing decisions we have to take, and that's where we start kind of daring on, but that we actually can practice. And hey, that's what I felt. How was that for you? Did you feel that too? We do that in the community. That is a daily, or that's just a practice that happens all the time, to check in with each other, and that we learn very, very fast, and we use each other. And I think it's very normal in the beginning to feel like, was that okay? Was it? But yeah, it's a beautiful practice, and it's also like you get happy, like even when you get mirrored back something else, because you're starting to learn to discern. That's really the art of discernment.
Yes, absolutely. And the bottom line is that energy never lies. It's an impartial, creative force. It's only ever expanding or contracting. And when we can drop beneath the realm of intellect and emotion and trust our body enough that we can hear when anybody's speaking to us, even when our own thoughts are popping up in our mind, that we can get a sense of, oh, that just gave me a hit of expansion, or that just gave me a hit of contraction. You have a level of awareness. You have a power. You have a connectedness there that will serve you to the end of days, because it never lies. And our ego, our fear-based ego, is very good at performing and very good at manipulating, because it's part of its purpose, is to help navigate us, to keep us safe from danger. But oftentimes it's keeping us separate from growth, because it's misperceiving growth as danger. And so we want to be able to, in a sense, outsmart our own programs so that we can learn to get underneath them and get around them, so they're no longer creating through us as they've been doing for a long time. But instead we can align with expansion and what that means, which often means moving into fear and vulnerability and out of control. Right? Because our program wants to keep us away from fear and keep us invulnerable, because that's scary. So we're often going in the opposite direction of what we're conditioned to do.
Yeah. It does take a while of facing those fears. Actually, it never stops. It just, yeah.
The other quick point, I won't go into it now, but what we will be touching on briefly too is Tantra as an aspect of speeding up the process of deepening into the hara, and in turn learning the language of energy. Primarily from the perspective of our lower dantian or hara area, the sexual center, the root chakras. They harness and hold the greatest amount, in my experience, of DNA heritage, let's say, or ancestral memory, or the darkest of trauma. And so to really open and activate call it Kundalini energy, open and activate the power in the hara. I'm looking down because it's just beneath the belly button. Tantra is a way to really speed that up. And when I say Tantra, I'm really talking about transformation. But when it comes to the sexual component, it can and is about sex. It can be about sex, but it transcends the sexual act too. It's more about the sexual organs, the sexual center, the sensual nature, and our true nature as being inherently connected to creative juice and sensuality and the Kundalini chi that rises from that place. And if we want to really heal and awaken, then we're going to have to find a way to let that light or chi rise up through each of our chakras and each of our power centers into the brain. And Tantra is a way to speed that process up. We will go into this in more detail in the module and what various different, not explicit Tantra practices. I don't do explicit Tantra practices in CT. There's plenty of other great sources for tantric healing. However, the process of cellular transformation is undeniably a Kundalini awakening process. And that was my own personal journey, was taking myself through a very deep tantric transformational process. And so I do want to touch on that and the importance of that and acknowledge that, a tantrika or tantric practitioner is not only about what I think a lot of the connotations out there perceive, that it's somebody who's super sexual, super open sexually and liberated in that regard and fearless. And no, it's about more that we have every chakra, every power center open to the world at all times to the best of our ability. Like that's the process of we're keeping any potential blocks transformed. We're doing the work to transform blockages so that our juice, our creative center, is engaging the world at all times, whether it's a child or a tree or the wind or our lover. And it's not always sexualized. It's only sexualized when appropriate. But that sensual nature at our root is liberated, open, and free. Now, whether we get there through tantric explicitly sexual practices, or we get there through working with therapists in order to heal our rape trauma, we get there through just doing practices with our monogamous partner, or we're in polyamory. It doesn't matter the way that it unfolds, because it will unfold differently for everybody. But what does matter is that you're brave enough to look inside your pelvis area, your genital area at an energetic level, and be willing to face the potential demons and history that's locked in there and do the work to transform it, simply so your true nature, which is that Kundalini essence, is free to move through your system unimpeded and clean and clean. And I think we really have to face a lot when we start playing with fire, because, the sexual energy is one of the most powerful healing forces we can have access to. And it's the energy of creation. So it's inevitable that distortions and taboo are going to come up. And so we have to also work not only to liberate that energy, but to clean up its channels as we do so.
Right. And this is a process that takes some time. We won't be doing all of it in 1 week.
That's for sure. I wish it was possible to do it in a week, but definitely not.
Did we say something about that energy doesn't lie yet?
Yes, I did. I mentioned energy never lies. It's an impartial creative force, and that's, that's the bottom line of what we want to learn here, because, and thank you for bringing it up again, because that's, I'm sure you've maybe observed in how I work, and, people can be sharing things, their stories, their issues, their pains, their troubles. And because I've trained myself to keep one eye and one ear on the energy at all times, which is the relationship that I've developed with my hara specifically. And we will go into a lot of practices on how to deepen your relationship with your hara. I'm listening, I maybe have 10 to 15 to 20% of my awareness on the story that individuals are telling. The rest of it is on what am I feeling? What is my instrument telling me about the truth of what the energy's saying coming through their body? Because individuals, we can be saying one thing and truly believe what we're saying. It's not that we're deliberately lying. We're sharing. But energy never lies. And the energy that's emanating from the cells and the tissues can tell a person's history. You can read a person's mind. And you can tune into a person at the other side of the world and know exactly what they're feeling when you know how to read energy. So when you have that lens, it's like what I call energy goggles. Often you hear me talk about, like, put on your energy goggles. Don't listen so much with the mind to the story and the five senses, but what's happening at the sixth sense. What are you feeling and picking up? And is the energy coming through that person aligned with what they're saying and what they're doing? If so, you're going to feel expansion and you're going to feel connection and safety and openness, and you'll feel that everything's on track. But if there's something a bit off somewhere, then you'll feel the split, or you'll feel the disconnection, or something's out of alignment. And that's often where we then start to contract. So when you know how to read contraction versus expansion and you can hear it, then you can start to discern, is this person, what's really being said? And then if you relate back to that person from the place of energy rather than the story they're telling, oftentimes the entire scaffolding that's been built on top of the truth will just go poof, it'll collapse. And freedom, some sort of liberation or catharsis takes place.
Because it sounds like scary or devastating, but usually there's a huge relief.
Relief, tremendous relief every time. And sometimes relief and sometimes confrontation to the ego, yes. But that's where, if you're going to step into a transformational field, you're going to have to be willing to face fear. And it's just the way it goes. But that ultimately, even if your ego is being is confronted a bit by the fact that the energy and the truth is being addressed, then great, because then you simply get to work with that part of your reaction to go, wait a minute, okay, what am I not seeing here? Where am I deluding myself? Where am I unconsciously lying to myself on some level to protect my precious heart, to protect my woundedness? And am I in a safe enough environment where I can maybe let that protection go now so that the light and love can get in and touch my wound? And no matter what, the potential is there for healing.
Right. Which is really why you are putting yourself in an energy field in the first place, where people are looking out for where the incongruence is happening. Because we're not trained to actually read the energy, right? Our cultural society is trained to be listening to the words, to the body language, to the actions. So it's really just like a recalibrating of what to listen, what to look out for, what to feel into. So
exactly. And that's a lot, again, to say one more time, when people observe me working, and they're like, how does she know that? Or how is that how did she pick that up? It's not magic. You could call it, it's really just listening to the energy. It's paying more attention to what the body is saying through feeling than what the mind is saying through memory and signs and concepts and stories. So we're dropping beneath that. And I often use the analogy too of table tennis, especially when people get into arguments and when it comes to communicating. You can have a whole communication. It's often I see the table tennis ball ping-ponging back and forth and nobody's getting anywhere. And right underneath the table is from hara to hara, like center to center, is where the real communication is taking place, the one that's not lying. And it tells, if you learn to read that, you can tell, hold on a minute, person on the left, you need be silent for, take that in, really hear what's being said to you.
Yeah, sometimes what's happening underneath the table has absolutely nothing to do with what's happening on top of the table.
Yes, and if we're easily seduced by the mind and our five senses and stories, then we can become very disconnected and discombobulated from our own power center, and we can be then easily manipulated as well, and take other people's power away from them unconsciously and manipulate those around us because we think we're doing the right thing, but actually we're above the table playing ping pong when underneath there's this very solid, centered, always true place that we can learn to tune into. That's what this is fundamentally all about. And then getting to see the magic, well, there is magic, and the power and the healing power and the awakening power that exists when we put our focus there.
Module number 5. Yeah, I think we can wrap it up with this. It's really a beautiful principle of cellular transformation, and a very important one, and one that will, of course, occur in all the other principles, as will they in this module. We're super excited about it. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for informing us about what will be happening, or some of what we'll be looking into in this 1 week.
Thank you, Kanika.
Yeah, have a great day.
Yay!
Bye-bye. Bye.